Welcome to our latest webinar. This one's called East Midlands at the Crossroads. Today we're going to be looking at the future economy of the region post-COVID-19. With the help of an expert panel, you can see them there. We'll be examining the effect of the last few months on the East Midlands economy, how the region has responded, and how its business owners and leaders can lead the fight back. In a moment, I'm going to ask our panel to introduce themselves, but before we do, we'd like to get everybody in the audience involved in today's event. At the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to see it. There's a Q&A button. If you want to ask a question to our panel, just press that button, type in your question, and I'll do my best to come to you and put it to the panel and get some answers for you. We've got around 45 minutes, so let's crack on and meet the panel. Just quick who you are and where you come from. Greg.
Hello there, I'm Greg Simpson. My day job is running Press for Attention Public Relations, which is a PR agency and content marketing provider. But I also wear a couple of other hats, which is why I'm really on this call. I'm the co-founder of Network LE over in Leicestershire and the co-founder of Nottingham Professional Services here in Nottingham, typically representing professional services firms. So interested to hear on their behalf as much as anything.
Thanks, Greg. John.
John Forkin, Managing Director of Marketing Derby. We're the inward investment agency for Derby and Derbyshire. And also I sit on the Midlands Engine Trading Investment Board and chair the China Group. Thanks,
John. Andy.
Hi, my name's Andy Reid. I'm here today with my hat as Deputy Chair of Leicestershire LEP, but also run a small sort of agency and a sports think tank in my spare time and semi-retired. So looking forward to sort of seeing through this next session.
Lucky you, Andy. David.
Good afternoon. I'm David Mellon. I'm the leader of Nottingham City Council.
Thanks, David. And finally, Sarah.
I'm Sarah Spink. I work for Midlands Connect, which is the subnational transport body for the Midlands region.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all. And thanks also to Press for Attention for sponsoring today's event. I think, you know, everybody knows we've had some bad jobs news across Nottingham and Derby, but some great news, John, this morning, of course, as well. And Leicester has obviously suffered with the extended lockdown, and it'll be interesting to see how the city comes out of that. I'm just going to ask the panel then, to start with, what do you see as the business barometer? What's it showing at the moment as lockdown eases? Do you think there's some light at the end of the tunnel? David, please.
Well, it's not an easy time for anybody. We expect in the private sector to lose about 15,000 jobs in Nottingham. Boots have already announced job losses, other companies have as well. And we're not through this yet, are we? You know, we are fortunate in Nottingham to have low numbers of infections so far, but we've seen around the country in the last couple of weeks that a second spike or local outbreaks can happen anywhere. And we're not at all complacent about that. And we want to do everything we can to support businesses in Nottingham and to protect jobs and bring more jobs here. So it's not an easy time, and the barometer doesn't look particularly good at the moment.
Okay. John, it's the same for Derby, really, hasn't it? The last sort of 6 weeks, 2 months of quite depressing news, but some good news this morning for you with the food manufacturing campus. Is that the sort of beginning of the fight back for the city?
I think so. I think that I mean, everybody's going through the same situation, and in some instances, in Derby's case, one of our great strengths has sort of become a great weakness, which is the aerospace industry, which, as you know, is headquartered here. And so the job losses at Rolls-Royce in particular this year and next year have kind of played quite large in our mind, and still do. And as David said, I think with the SMEs, there is a little bit of the wolf is still at the door, because a lot of it is shielded at the moment by the furlough scheme. In Derby City, there's 35,000 people on furlough at the moment, and who knows how many of those will go back into their jobs as they were. So I think we're all realistic about that. But I think our view is that what's happening is we're never going back. And so what we're finding is businesses who are innovating now through the pandemic are the ones who are going to be pushing forward as things move. And the announcement that was made today about Derby is massive. I mean, that's a bigger inward investment than Toyota, which was just over 30 years ago. So 4,500 jobs in the technology sector in relation to food, manufacturing and development and research and so on and so forth. Possibly for us, this is part of, and I think this has regional value. It's not just a Derby thing. I think it's good for Derby, it's good for Nottingham, it's good for the East Midlands, that type of investment. But it's part of diversification. And I think what we'll see is businesses diversifying, but also economies. And we're certainly chasing that in Derby.
Okay. Andy, what about Leicester? I mean, it's been a real tough time for Leicester, hasn't it? And how are businesses going to come back from, having an extra month really of not being able to open, especially in the hospitality sector, obviously?
Yeah, in particular hospitality, and those that have expected the footfall to return when the rest of the country did, has been a sort of real blow for everybody. And I think the way it's been communicated has made it even tougher, really. I think you'd struggle on the streets of Leicester to understand exactly what the situation is even today. I think we're all a little bit confused by what we can and can't do. So that's had a real impact. I think we're a little bit like the rest of the region. There's lots of small SMEs. We're not probably reliant on any one big industry in the county. So sometimes that's a bit of a weakness with the announcements of big jobs, but it often means that big job losses don't come in those sort of sectors as well. So probably the diversity of the sector will help it to bounce back a little bit. And like the others have said, I think it's those that are innovating at the moment. My main worry from a lot of the facts and figures, though, is that clearly a lot has been hidden by furlough and these other things. So actually, I'm not quite sure we fully understand the impact. And even on the good news, we'll come on to it probably a little bit later, that we've had from the government today and some investment, is that at the same time there are jobs being lost from or pre-announced. There's a lot of redundancies being announced that are a bit further down the line. So I probably get a better picture probably come September, October about the full impact and how many of those people who are currently furloughed will come back into the workforce. And obviously having 3 universities in the county as well, particularly worried about graduate unemployment and the scarring effect. So really trying to see what we can do around training to get people the skills that are required, that when the economy does pick up. I declare an interest. I've got a son who's just graduated and is sending applications at the moment with, as you can imagine, no luck at all. It's a really, really tough environment for them. Yeah,
not a good time to be a graduate at all, is it, this summer? Sarah, when lockdown was enforced, obviously no one was going anywhere. How do you sort of get back to putting connectivity, east-west connectivity, back on, the front pages? What's the plan?
I think in some ways, we've always had a very, very long-term view. Midlands Connect is all about that sort of long-term strategy and making sure that we've got a pipeline of schemes, because these schemes don't just appear overnight. They take a long time to come into fruition. And actually, by sort of making sure we've got that conveyor belt ready to go, when the government does say, okay, we have some money here, what should we do? We've got those business cases, we've got those plans ready to go. We've actually been quite encouraged by the Prime Minister's announcements of, build, and the sort of project speed, trying to get some of these things that will often take a decade to get a big strategic transport project through, to actually streamline and make that process more efficient. Okay. I think that people are going to have to be more and more flexible about how and where they work, and better connectivity can only help that.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, Greg, you work with some small, some SMEs, don't you? A lot of SMEs, and conversely, the 2 groups you mentioned at the top there, the members of those that work for big professional services firms. What are you seeing in both of those sectors? But firstly, the sort of SME sector.
Well, it's interesting. I was going to turn the tables and ask you a question there, Sam, because obviously I deal in sentiment and perception. And I look at regularly, when I'm looking at your newsletters, job creation stories and seeing the good news behind that. And I see then the job loss stories. There's probably a lot of job creation stories out there that we're not necessarily hearing about, because they are at the smaller level in engineering in smaller firms, as we're doing sort of walking towards the onshoring side of things, which is going to be huge potentially for Derby when we come to manufacturing. What I'm interested in actually as well is this whole thing, sort of Sarah intimated about there. The Midlands is a great place to live and work, and it's a message quite a lot of the cities have. There's not many places have this offering that's got these separate cities with their own identities, but one larger collective feeling to it. So it's sort of, you can have a great big office there and silo offices, but you can also have that more flexible working from home model, because we have a great place to actually live. It's not that we're all marooned in city centres. So I think that it will help people to attract more employees that way, because we can work from home, we can work flexibly. But that will come down to things like Wi-Fi and connection speeds, of course, and broadband.
Yeah. Yeah, is that not also the region's weakness, though, Greg? I mean, if we look at the West Midlands or the Northwest, or it's Birmingham and Manchester, and they sort of stole a march on the East Midlands a little bit. So, I don't know. That'd be interesting to hear the panel's views on that as well. Would we be better off having one sort of central hub as we emerge from this, rather than 3 or 4 or 5, if you want? John, what do you think? Obviously, you don't think it should be Nottingham or Leicester, but is that, we've spoken in the past before, and is that hindrance to the East Midlands, do you think?
Well, it is as it is, so there's not much we can do about it. We don't have a single hub, a Manchester or a Birmingham in the East Midlands, so we have to turn that, as Greg says, into a strength. And I think that I think the technical term for it is polycentric, and we do have these different cities and counties which are really, really good places to base a business and to live. I think the quality of life offer that all 3 counties have wrapped around their cities is becoming more important post-COVID than it's ever been before. We're starting to see evidence already of people who are looking for moving out of the hothouse of London and the southeast. Spending 2 hours or 3 hours on the tube every day to go into a city skyscraper is probably less attractive than it used to be. They get a greater bang for buck, so there's some of that. But I think the thing we have to deal with, though, is and where I do see this is the fragmentation politically is probably our weakest point, because we don't have an Andy Street or an Andy Burnham. And you see these guys on television most evenings, and I think that somehow we've got to find a more unified voice between the 3 million people who live in Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire and Leicestershire, including the 3 cities, and then some great towns like Chesterfield, Loughborough and Mansfield in there. And at the moment, I can't remember how many local authorities in those 2-tier structures are in those 3 counties, but you're probably talking 20 to 30 local authorities. David will be better to be able to talk about that. But I think sometimes not having that single voice, not having that combined approach to things and collaboration within the public sector can sometimes be a weakness, and we get played off. Having said that, D2N2 certainly, I've not looked at the LEPS figures from this morning, but D2N2 did very well out of the round that was announced today. So it can be done, but we have very strong local partnerships, but maybe the partnerships regionally are a little more fragmented.
David, how are you working together with the rest of the region? Do you want to just run through what you're doing?
Lots of things, really, and I think we need to sell our strengths. The people that you've talked about who are mayors of mainly urban areas, Andy Street is framed as the West Midlands mayor, but he speaks for the urban areas, not for the rural areas around it. And I think we have in the East Midlands a way of us working together. We're going to come and talk about HS2 at some point, I think, today. And HS2 is a really good example of politicians of different political colours coming together to say, this is the best thing for the region. This is what we need in the East Midlands. We have been underinvested in, and it's about time that was righted. We've just had some money in partnership with Derby through the Transforming Cities Fund, and it was credited to us that we were working together as 2 cities, and we need to do more of that. It doesn't mean that we all need to mould into one whole, and be the same thing, because Leicester, Derby and Nottingham offer different things, and the counties in between offer a variety. And I think, as Greg was saying, quality of life is really, really important. So I think, we need to strengthen the way that we're working in with Midlands Connect, Midlands Engine, as well as East Midlands Councils and our LEPs. There's a lot of partnership. I spend a lot of my time with other leaders of councils and with officers from other councils. That is absolutely the way that we need to go forward, and we need to get the ear of government. Hopefully, with Robert Jenrick as a Nottinghamshire MP, perhaps can be a bigger focus on the East Midlands and the opportunities that we have here.
Is that what you found when Robert Jenrick visited Derby? Sorry, John, was he sympathetic to the region?
Yeah, it was. I mean, if you remember, this relationship started at one of the Downing Street press conferences. And it was the week of the Rolls-Royce announcement. And he made it very clear. He was asked the question by a local journalist, and he said, he gets the area, he gets the region, as David said, because he is a local MP. And he made a promise to work with the local authorities, to work with the businesses in the city and around, on the recovery. And to be fair to him, he came up last week and he spent some time at Rolls-Royce and he spent some time at the iHub. And then today, thankfully, we're part of that announcement of positive. But I think, as David said, it's for us to make business cases, and I think there's obviously a big round coming with the comprehensive spending review. And then I have a fear that the sort of the public spending checkbook will be shut for a bit. So I think what we need to do is ensure that we do have these so-called shovel-ready schemes that can actually, the announcement can be made like that one was made this morning. But that smart park in Derby should be on site at Q1 next year. And that's what we need, is things that can actually, people can see very quickly, tangible delivery. So as well as making the bids, we've got to get really good at delivering on the promises. And I think one of the things we can safely say to government, not just from Derby and Derbyshire, but I think from the East Midlands, we're very pragmatic people. And we're quite happy saying to people like Robert Jennery and the Prime Minister, you'll get greater bang for buck here. And maybe the last thing I'll just say on that, I think the regional MPs are really important in this at the moment. And the more that they're engaged and knowledgeable of what the priorities for each area is and where they can add value, whichever political party they're from, is really important. So the 3 city MPs that we have in Derby have worked very strongly behind the scenes to make the things like today's announcement happen. And we need more of that.
Sarah, I'm going to come on to HS2 in a second, but John made a good point there about, getting things off the ground pretty quickly. David and Andy, I'm going to come to you for Leicester and Leicestershire and Nottingham. David, I know I'm not going to go over old ground on the Broad Marsh, but when can we realistically expect to see a partnership put in place to bring that forward, do you think? Because that is something that will give people confidence, isn't it? Absolutely.
Really disappointing for the people of Nottingham that have got into the state they have, and that doesn't just affect Nottingham, it affects the whole country, because they are a big retail centre owner across the country. And it's disappointing, but we are looking at it as an opportunity as well, so that we can talk to the people of Nottingham and the region to say, is this still the right plan to go forward with a shopping centre in today's climate, or, as we're probably going to be referring, looking at other things that we can do with that space. There is a greater demand for accommodation in the city centre. We have ambitions to be more environmental, with our ambitions to be carbon neutral by 2028. So therefore that should shape the space. Is it a combination of people's leisure time as well as their retail time? We know in our city centres that we need to encourage people to come in, not just to do their shopping, but to dwell here, but to have some time to enjoy good public space, to eat and to drink and to have good time with friends and family. And those are the kind of things that we want to see in the Broadmarsh space. But it's a very early days yet. We've still got legal dealings to be done with the administrators and with those who have a claim on the lease that has been passed over to us at the moment. But we're hopeful for the future.
Good stuff. And Andy, what can Leicester do to sort of install some sort of quick hit confidence, do you think?
Well, you're right. I mean, just going back to what some of the others were saying, I think that the regional voice is really quite important. I was an MP for 13 years and sort of really tried to work across. So we had EMDRA, I suppose, in those days. So there was a greater connectivity about us all working collectively together. And I think we need to just make sure we have that spirit of cooperation and collaboration, and probably a little bit more co-creation. So we're creating these solutions rather than coming with projects and probably putting them together sort of later in the stage. We're really keen to see that a little bit more. And obviously, I'm glad John mentioned it, but Loughborough sits right between the 3 big cities, so we're always a great location. If anybody can't decide which of the 3 cities to find themselves, Nottingham, Leicester, and Derby. So that's brilliant. And obviously, the university and other things that we've got. But I suppose just building on what other people have said as well is the deliverability. I think as a LEP, we have a good reputation for being able to deliver, and the shovel-ready projects that John has mentioned. And so creating that pipeline is really important, so that whenever there is the opportunity to sort of rush into action, there are deliverable projects ready to go. And I think we've had a record of that, and I know that's the same across the region. I would say we just do need to do it more and better. We're not going to ever be a West Midlands or a Greater Manchester with Andy and the 2 Andys. Our strength is almost in our diversity. I used to work as a regional officer with the county councils as part of the East Midlands Brussels office, and it was always very difficult to explain the East Midlands, but that was also one of its strengths. You know, we knew at the heart of and each of the counties has its own diversity and strength. So in terms of where the city's going, I agree with David on that last point. There's going to have to be a little bit of a reappraisal about what our cities. I mean, there already is. I'm part of our Loughborough Town Deal partnership, and I know Mansfield and other places have got some of this striking ahead. But even where we were in January, when we sort of started looking at this originally, I think that has shifted quite a lot. So when we're talking about connectivity earlier, we're probably talking about broadband and Wi-Fi and gigabyte stuff. Whereas actually probably now talking more cycleways and the ability for people to move in and out of our urban areas and into the countryside. I do a lot on well-being, and I think that's been a really big agenda shift over the last sort of 6 months, where people have realised the quality of life is a large part of what they want. So I've just seen in the village where I live, the amount of shopping that now takes place locally. The town centres and the city centres are empty. So we're probably going to see a little bit of a rebalancing of where people live and work, and therefore where they shop. And so we need to embrace and go with that and make sure that works for everybody. So exactly what David is saying is probably repurposing some of our real urban space, because the footfall probably will never return to the same levels as we've seen, and it's been struggling anyway. So that's quite important. And on the collaboration, I think probably we're quite unique in Leicestershire in that we've got a Tory County Council, a Labour City Mayor. But I've never, you know, in all my years of working in economic development, either as an officer or in Parliament or within councils, I've never seen such quite close collaboration between two organisations, and that's really comes across wherever the two leaders are sort of portraying themselves. And so I think we need to demonstrate that as a region, and I think there's an opportunity to make sure that we're batting up with the big boys and girls at the top who are really making these points right into Westminster. And that's where I think, as everybody's agreed, it's the collective voice of our MPs who have the ear of ministers on a regular basis that will make that sort of difference. So we can work collectively much better. There are some big projects out of the announcements today. There's a couple going into the city, again regenerating parts of the city that have been neglected for quite a long time. The old Chorus site and the bus station, we'll see some investment this morning from the government, and that will unlock and link into the stuff around the John Lewis and the High Cross Centre and the waterside. So there's a continual redevelopment sort of schedule there, and it's all starting to really improve stuff that's been left on the wayside for probably 20-30 years. But it's tough. There is so much to do. I think that's the key issue, and everybody can highlight different parts of the cities and their own counties where further investment is needed. So whilst we welcome this level of funding, I think we all know if we doubled it, trebled it, or even probably had 10 times this much, it's only at that stage we could have a really massive impact across the region. So let's not rest on our laurels. We just need to make sure we work even harder over the next period. And it is going to be tough, as John said. The CSR is probably our last opportunity to get our foot in the door before probably some of this spending largesse. I used to work in the Treasury. I can't imagine as ever, even in those generous times, sort of putting this amount of money through the door and onto the local areas that we represent here lately. So this is an opportunity for us to get in there and make sure we can make it work for us, and in the long term, not just any quick hits.
Sorry, yeah.
I think the collaboration thing is, so important, and beyond the East Midlands as well. I mean, as I say, we sort of cover the East and West Midlands. We go all the way from the sort of Lincolnshire coast all the way across to the Welsh border, and making sure people are working together across that geography, is really important, because you say, you're thinking about the big boys of Birmingham. Well, actually, there's a lot more in the West Midlands than just Birmingham. There's a lot of people that sort of Hereford and Worcester and Stoke who are all sort of saying, hang on, it's not just Birmingham. So the polycentricity that you've actually got in the East Midlands is actually quite a good thing, because the cities are known under their own merits as well. And I think in the last few years, the region's actually done really well at actually coming together and saying, these are our objectives, these are what we need to push forward. And I think it's actually, and you're also sort of that cross-boundary sort of side as well. We do a lot of work with sort of projects looking at sort of linkages between Coventry and Leicester, for example. The rail connection between the two cities is pretty poor, really. And it's so close apart, and they could do so much with one another. They're two of the fastest growing cities in the region. We just need that better connectivity to keep that spark going and to make it burn brighter.
Sarah, we'll talk about HS2 now, if that's okay. Are you going to be pushing for an earlier start to any East Midlands leg? And do you think that's achievable?
I I think that, well, there's two elements here. There's the East Midlands leg is just as important as anything else, and we need to make sure it happens. We need to make sure HS2 happens in full across the region. And this isn't just so we can get to places quicker. That's not what it's all about. It's about firstly releasing that capacity so we can then increase those regional services and the freight services.
Absolutely.
You know, freeing up space for those is vital. And I think we did some work last year that said there's sort of 70 odd stations across the Midlands that will benefit from HS2, and most of them aren't connected directly to it, because you will get more frequent services and, you know, services to more diverse locations. We launched something last month that was talking about direct services from the East Midlands down in towards sort of Oxford and the Thames Valley, going by Birmingham Airport and Coventry. It's giving people that sort of wider connectivity is key. And it's not just about getting HS2 delivered quicker. What we want to make sure is, first, it's delivered in full. But even if that doesn't happen for 20 years, we need to push forward things now that when HS2 does arrive, it will take advantage of all those other things we've put into place and really work. We've got to make sure that it works for the region, not just those areas with stations. So we launched sort of Midlands Engine Rail last year, and that really sort of grasped the attention, because what we were saying was, look, you've got all these other things that you can do before HS2 arrives that will really improve the lives of businesses, of residents, of visitors, and then HS2 will just make that even better. And I think that's the key. Our access to Towton, so Towton really is you know, in the middle of everywhere, or in the middle of nowhere, depends how you look at it. But what we've got to do is make it work. So you've got so much going on around that area. You've got sort of East Midlands Gateway, you've got the rail sort of head up there, you've got the airport, you've got the power station, all these things being redeveloped and regenerated, but we've got to make sure that people can get there. You know, it's pointless having this huge centre of economic activity if no one can get there, or you have to drive to get there. And that's really what the sort of access to Towton that went last month really pushes on. This is a vision for the region of how things could look in a more sustainable manner.
Good stuff. Greg, do you think businesses have bought into that?
I think the problem is with this is a lot of people like to moan more than they like to praise, don't they? So it's far easier for you, Sam, to get someone emailing you tomorrow morning or after this webinar saying, oh, what a load of nonsense, can't believe you talked about that. People criticise far easier than they get enthused about. So I'm highly positive about it. I just think the perception of it is this united voice that everyone on this call is coming from. No one's talking about their own city on this call. There is this united approach from everybody, which I think is really, really positive. Now, there are probably people on the call thinking, I can't see this happening. And, you know, obviously they're welcome to their opinion. But I think, yeah, broadly, people are very positive about it. They just maybe don't necessarily tell the media in quite such vociferous terms as other people do.
Yeah, agreed. We've got a question from the audience, and it's Ian Borley, I'm sure a few of you know. Ian wants to know, is there clarity of who should take responsibility for the training and retraining that will be needed to adapt to the new normal? Andy, I'm going to come to you on that, if that's okay. You know, you said your son is just coming out of university. Probably what he's been working towards is not, of course, not being thrown out the window, but he's going to have to adapt pretty quickly, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. So he did law, and obviously would like to go into a law profession, but it's again, that's another sector at the moment. I've got lots of friends who run practices and they're struggling like anybody else. So there's not a lot of recruitment going on, although, as people said, there is still recruitment going on. So it's not a completely bleak sort of picture. So yeah, we've set up, and I'm sure this is replicated across the region, but just to try and get the colleges and the skills providers much closer to the employers. There's always been my experience, been a bit of a time lag in terms of what skills are required and trying to match those two. You know, employers quite often, as Greg just sort of said, quite like to moan, quite rightly, perhaps sometimes, that the skill sets aren't exactly what they need. So actually trying to get a much closer relationship between the jobs that are available locally and the skills that we're able to provide through the colleges. So actually, as a LEP, we've got a skills board that particularly looks at that, and very much employer engagement in that. And as you know, we've all got, as you said, we're collaborating across the region, but then there are specifics sort of locally. So we've got space, logistics, sports and life science and pharmaceuticals are the bits where we think there's potentially growth over the next sort of decade. And so we will be concentrating quite a lot of our time and effort in those particular skills areas. One of the things we really want to do as well is retain graduates. It's not been we've been good, but nowhere near as good as we could be with 3 universities. Trying to retain as many of those graduates in the county as possible or across the region is really vital to us. And going back to that other piece around HS2 and the quality of life sort of piece, I think the draw to having to live and work in London probably will shift. I think we've demonstrated that over the last 6 months. Half of my time was still spent going to meetings in London. I've not been since March. That first week of lockdown was the last time I was there. I coped really well, worked across the country. I chair some national organisations. It works fine. So we're probably going to see the potential for people to sort of find themselves, as everyone has said, looking at quality of life as part of that driver for where they locate themselves. And those skill sets will be those who are, looking around. There's a couple of you look a little bit younger than me, but the digital natives, as opposed to those who are later arrivals at digital, we're all having to catch up. I've watched my son working, and it's done in seconds, stuff that takes me half a day to sort out. So people are already ahead on this, and we just need to give them the work experience. I think that's really the key bit in this next period, isn't it? So you don't get this, what they call scarring, isn't it? There is a lot of research that demonstrates if you're unemployed in those first 5 to 6 months, there's a lag in your entire career. So we just need to give people as much of that work experience as possible, so that when the economy does pick up, they haven't been just doing stuff that isn't particularly relevant. So it's incumbent on all of us, and particularly as employers, with the new schemes come on, can we take on recent graduates and others from colleges to make sure that they have that work experience ready for all of us as an economy? Because I know what'll happen. We've all been here before. In 2 years' time, there'll be skill shortages, and we'll all wonder what we were doing as employers at the time when so this is the time to invest in skills training.
Well, that happened, David and John, in Derby with the big job losses there. I know, John, you've got the big investment story this morning, but people are still going to need training on those jobs. Who's going to do it, David, in Nottingham?
I think there's a big gap in adult education. We put rightly a good concentration into what young people do at school and through higher and further education. But many people, if you talk to them in their adult life, had a change of career, and that change of career was often prompted by some kind of retraining, being able to go to college one night a week to do an extra qualification to enable them to change the course of their career. And that's almost completely gone. There has been no investment in adult education, and our colleges need to have that there again, so that people who do find themselves maybe sadly without a job can have options. And that isn't there at the moment, when we really need to push central government to invest in that. It's left to big companies to do that work, and that's good in its own right. And obviously apprenticeships are really important here, both in public and private businesses. Apprenticeships are really, really important, but we need to give that opportunity for people to have a second or a third chance. And I think the question, that the jury's still out as to whether there really is a commitment to investing in training and education for those who are a little bit older.
Okay. John, what's going to happen in Derby?
Well, I think there's been a bit of a nirvana in terms of, trying to match employers and skills. And this is, there's been so many different commissions, so many different reviews, and so many different initiatives over the years and decades, that maybe I'm just at that age now where I think I've heard all of this before. And I think the key thing is opportunity. I think if we're still creating opportunities for jobs and that people can then fit into them, I agree in terms of, I think we need to see an increased investment in the FE sector. I think that's a connecting sector. I agree with David on that. That's been underfunded now for decades, possibly, and its time may well have come. I think that the important thing, I think, that when we're talking to businesses, I was at a business last week doing a tour of their factory, and I said, "What's your biggest challenge?" And what's your biggest challenge today? And his word was recruitment, which kind of took me back a little bit. So there is still desire out there to recruit people. Bombardier at the moment to recruit 300 people in the city, and So there is growth in jobs, but I think the key issue is trying to find the right type of flexibilities and match those opportunities. And I think what we can do at local levels and at regional levels is more about those job matching type initiatives, so people can find out what's going on and can try to get to them. I do feel I feel very sorry for graduates at the moment. I graduated in the early 80s, straight into the teeth of a recession. And there were job schemes then, which my first job was one of those government job schemes, community program it was called. And I think we probably need to look post furlough at those. The government needs to invest in that type of initiative to make it easier for employers to get people in, get them those first jobs. That certainly happened to me. And then the last thing I'd say about this, and it is education. I am really, really concerned, I'm sure other people are, that a lot of our young people now have not had an education for 6 months. I'm talking about schools. And that could even continue longer. And the impact of that over the next few years and decades could be very severe unless we kind of short circuit that and get them back plugged in. So in other words, the equality and the wealth gap looks like it's going to get worse, not better, if we're not very careful about this.
I will also crack up, John, if my little boy doesn't go back to school in September. So, yeah. Greg, are you hearing from your clients and the people that you deal with that recruitment is tough, as John said? Recruitment's still a priority, but tough.
I think that depends, doesn't it? Because I do work a lot in professional services, and some people are in a position where they're moving around and they know that they are an asset. They are still attractive to a lot of firms. I think some people, as the panel's rightly said, are going to go, you know what, I don't need to live in London for this career anymore. I would rather return home to the region rather than go further afield. But I work with an engineering firm. You'll probably get a story on it tomorrow. They're recruiting over in Derbyshire at the moment, and they are also looking to apprenticeship roles. But it won't be the same across the board. And I think it's some of the firms that have been able to keep going pretty well through this pandemic. They've managed to innovate this dreaded pivot word we've all been getting involved in. There's some firms out there who are growing at alarming rates and really are struggling to then find the people out there. And that might be because some of the candidates maybe don't know those roles exist, because maybe these firms aren't quite so high profile.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a question from Alicia. It's about HS2, Sarah. My feeling is, Alicia says, my feeling that HS2 is that HS2 was conceived and certainly sold to us as a faster connectivity to London. Are we sure this is still going to be as important if, as many commentators predict, people and businesses are going to move away from the capital and pursue that improved quality of life that I think has already been mentioned today? Sarah?
I think one of the big problems with HS2 to start with was it was always a comms issue. Now, the way, I'm going to get techie for a sec, the way business cases are made to government for transport projects is in value of time saved. So the business case for HS2 was always going to be based around that element. However, what isn't always incorporated, which is the much more exciting story and the much more relevant story, is the capacity unlock. Because at the moment, across the region, the rail network is full. People say, oh, we need more trains, more frequent trains, more trains between Derby and Nottingham, more trains between Chesterfield and Leicester, you know, but there's full. We can't put on those additional regional services and make local improvements until we sort out that capacity issue. Now, HS2 is the capacity issue. So that's the first argument. It is worth getting excited about the journey time savings once you get north of Birmingham. The idea of being able to get from Birmingham to Leeds in an hour, that's quite exciting to me. The idea, I think Towton to Birmingham is 20 minutes. You know, this is where the journey times actually get quite exciting, is when you're actually north of Birmingham, once you're onto the sort of phase two elements. The actual journey time to London, you know, there's an argument that maybe we don't need that, but what we do need is the capacity, and not just for the extra passenger services, but as I mentioned earlier, the freight. You know, we talk a lot about, you know, sustainable development and freight. If we get this right, if we get HS2 and all the associated bits that go with it, if we get that right, we can really improve, you know, take some of those freight journeys off the road, make a lot more sustainable movements available. You know, we can't just say we're going to move all freight off the road. That's not going to happen. But what we can do is we can give businesses and organisations the opportunity, the choice, because at the moment they don't have that choice. They have to use road transport. But if the extra freight paths were available and at a decent price, they would use them. And we know that.
Okay, I hope that's answered your question, Liz. Does anybody want to jump in on that from Sarah? Yes, Andy.
Just to support what Sarah's saying, really. Obviously, I was involved right at the start where we kicked a lot of British projects, big capital projects, isn't it? I was around when we sort of talked about it 10 years ago, even longer in government, and came up with the idea. And I think probably its problem is that its name, because it isn't all about the high speed. And unfortunately, being called High Speed 2 just gives everybody the impression it is about speed. If anybody who's travelled on HS1 recognises the difference of the quality of the journey and increased capacity that brings. So it almost needs renaming because it is about the capacity issue. And I'm not going to fuss over, we often do it with straightening the line. And, and there's been investment from across the region in Market Harbour to knock a few minutes off getting to London. That's great. But actually, I think what we really need, I'd love to be able to get from Leicester to Coventry or from Leicester to Birmingham in a decent way, or get across to Chesterfield or get up to Sheffield or get across to Manchester. They're the bits that we really need to see improved. So I think I can, going back to Greg's point earlier, it's dead easy to moan because people say, well, I'm not going to be rushing to London. Well, actually, this isn't it. This is us updating a Victorian railway system for the 21st century, and hopefully it will reduce numbers of flights that we take because actually be just much more convenient. So there's a bigger win here for the whole country. And I was in Japan last September, just having a go on the new maglev, which travels at 561 kilometres an hour. I think we just need to sort of start to think ahead already and get up to those sort of speeds. That would be a very different experience.
Well, so the first maglev was in Birmingham, between Birmingham and the airport for
right. Yes, a bit slow though, from what I recall.
And I think there's quite a lot of talk about people saying, well, Zoom will change everything. People won't travel anymore. Just go out on the roads and see the numbers of cars that there are travelling all around the country. And if we want to get people out of their cars, then we need a 21st century transport system. And HS2 is absolutely part of that, absolutely part of the infrastructure for the East Midlands. And all the stuff that Sarah was talking about in terms of access to Toton is very exciting, using buses and trams and other kinds of transport to get there to the hub. In Nottingham, we've got now 40% of journeys in the city are done on public transport, and we're ambitious for more of that. And it's difficult at the moment because of people wanting to social distance, but actually the future is trying to get people out of their cars and having many different choices of public transport to use.
Thanks, David. We're really out of time, so let's ask you all one last question, really. I'll start with you, John, because you've had a nice big win today. What does the East Midlands need to do to position itself to attract inward investment in the future, such as your big announcement today about the food manufacturing hub?
I think it's been said already by most of the speakers. I think it's a joined up, clear message of selling the benefits. I sort of think customer, not product. So if you think about what people are looking for, and then look at our product across the 3 cities and 3 counties, there's not much we can't do here, and build on the heritage and the history and the OEMs that we have. Whether it's Next, whether it's Boots, whether it's Rolls-Royce or whatever. And Rolls-Royce isn't going anywhere, by the way. Rolls-Royce will still employ over 10,000 people in the city of Derby in the worst case scenario of the current round. So we've got those OEMs in the area. We've got a fantastic SME sector, and we've got that access. I think every single investment I've dealt with, the centrality of this part of the world always comes into it. We're right in the centre of the country, and allowing for all that conversation we just had about HS2, the connectivity here is second to none, not just in terms of London, but in terms of those other cities that people are mentioning in the economy. So I think we just have to need the courage of our convictions. I think that we may not always be the most fancy Dan in the world, but I think that what I found with investors is trust. They know that we will deliver, and that we've got good people with good workforce, good authorities. And if you take I'll just finish on that smart part thing from this morning. It's not like Derby City Council played an absolute blinder in lending that investment, and it really does show that when we're able to kind of put our hands to the wheel, we can really, really deliver. So I think we just have to carry on, but maybe just be a bit more assertive, a bit clearer about who we are and how we are, because. And this is just not for our part. Often the Midlands can often be perceived as a flyover state. People, the news will talk about London, South East, then they go straight to the north. You go, well, hang on, what about us? So we are connected with the future of the Midlands as well, and that's why we're big fans of the Midlands engine, because we're in this together.
Okay. Greg, do you want to have a final word on this one?
I totally agree with what John said there. It's, you know, I'm from Derbyshire. I live in Nottingham. I work in Leicester a lot of the time, and I work in Birmingham a lot of the time. And I think we get this outside of this conversation. There's this whole them and us thing: Derby, Leicester, Nottingham. Then you get Midlands, then you get West Midlands and East Midlands. As a collective, there's a huge offering to people, and it's, without sounding like an advert for a certain Mars, you know, Mars bar, work, rest, and play. You can do it all in the Midlands or East Midlands. You don't have to be picking and choosing and basing yourself in one camp. And if you go there, you can't possibly go there. So I think as a region, we hold all the cards if you play them correctly.
Positive note to end on there, Greg.
Thank you.
Okay, time has beaten us. I'd like to thank all our panelists today. Thank you to Greg, John, Sarah, David and Andy. Thank you to Press for Attention for sponsoring, and thank you all for joining us today and asking the questions, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.